Hello, everyone. We are still waiting on some people to come in here, but until then, I want to give out some housekeeping stuff here. Francine Shaw, she's a great presenter. We had her on last week, and we had an amazing image of Neuroman that she's going to share again today here. She is, she's very savvy about food safety, just like her logo says. Probably one of the top in the nation in terms of food service and restaurants and all that. And we're going to make this more like a dialogue. So as the presentation is going on, we will be having conversation, and that's where I want to talk about housekeeping. Is as this conversation is going on, please, if you have any questions, there's this little bubble there on the side. That's where you can put into chat, and so chat in there a question or a comment or anything like that, and we will be adding those as this presentation goes on. One of the most frequently asked questions is, at the end of this, will you receive the video? And yes, we are recording this. You will be emailed the video and a link, and also we're posting this on YouTube. And if you missed last week's performance, you can go and see that on YouTube as well, and the YouTube channel is trained to comply. But you can also search in Savvy Food Safety or Restaurant Food Safety or any of those, and it will pop up as well. Well, I am going to introduce Francine and then let her introduce herself. And I'm going to go off a video and be there whenever you guys have questions or any other questions come up. Again, Francine Shaw, she owns a company called Savvy Food Safety. She's been around for quite some time. I think you were for the county, right, for food safety for a while?
Yes, my company did food safety inspections for a jurisdiction in the state of Pennsylvania for quite a while. We were hired to do it. It was over 300 establishments. I'm sorry.
Nice. I'm always fascinated by some of those stories. Fascinated and scared by some of the stories that you tell of some of these restaurants. But just like anything, there's some great and there's some not so great. And then after that, you now provide ServSafe on your own, correct?
That's correct. We do a multitude of things within the company. We provide third-party inspections. We teach the ServSafe courses as well as the National Registry, provide consulting for large and small corporations. If food safety is involved, we can handle it.
Great. All right, well, I am going to exit my camera here and let you take over the show.
Okay. So, according to the World Health Organization, every year around the world, there are 600 million foodborne illnesses, which is absolutely astronomical. That's 1 in 10 people will get a foodborne illness every single year. 420,000 people die. And of those, 1/3 of those are children, and those are children under the age of 6 or 7 years old. All of this is 100% preventable. It's not like heart disease or diabetes or any of those things that you may be genetically predisposed to getting. This happens because somebody messed up. Somebody didn't cook something to the right temperature. Somebody didn't wash their hands. A product wasn't grown in an environment that was safe. It wasn't manufactured or processed correctly. And these are the reasons that people get sick and die. Many times people think that you get a foodborne illness and you vomit, you get diarrhea, and you're sick for 24, 48 hours, and you go about your life and everything's fine. A lot of foodborne illnesses have long-lasting effects, whether those effects are have something to do with weakening your heart, a kidney disease, or something along those lines. Keep in mind that in the food service industry, we hear the term cross-contamination and cross-contact, and many times those terms are used interchangeably, and they are not the same thing. Cross-contamination is when bacteria or other microorganisms are unintentionally transferred from one substance or object to another. For example, if you are cutting up raw meat and then you bring raw produce to that table without washing, rinsing, and sanitizing and place that on the table, that is an example of cross-contamination. That is one of the most common causes of food poisoning, making it a really important area of food safety. In some countries, that is, the UK, for example, that is one of the most common causes of food poisoning, right beside temperature control. It's something that I actually just happened to see last night. I went to pick up food for my husband and myself on my way home from work. And people do this all the time. When you go out to eat, just watch the people in the kitchen. We do this because this is what we do for a living, and we notice things that sometimes we wish we didn't. I went to pick up my food, and I was standing there waiting for the order to go. And the gentleman that was the server was picking up, he actually was getting soup for somebody, and he was getting ready to put the soup into the bowl. But right before he did that, he took his hands and this is really disgusting, but he was picking at his face. And he did that, and then he took his hands, he didn't wash them, put it in the bowl, and then he got the soup, dumped it in the bowl, and went about his business. Staph infections, norovirus, all kinds of things can come from doing those types of things. That is an example of cross-contamination. Again, those types of things happen. Sometimes people are wearing gloves when they're doing it, and sometimes they're not. He happened to not have any gloves on, not that it would have made a difference. Sometimes gloves are no more than a false sense of security. And I'm not by no means saying don't wear gloves. I'm just saying that a lot of times they're a false sense of security. Matt, are you going to ask me a question?
Yeah, no, I get that all the time. Also on the supply side as well with the gloves, is I agree with you with the false sense of security, where it's you'll say like, hey, do you just know what you just did with those gloves? And like, well, I have gloves on. Yeah, but you just made those gloves dirty now, you know? And I totally agree with you. And I've seen that happen at restaurants as well as people picking, people picking produce or whatever.
Well, and if you would wash your hands, you should change the gloves.
Right.
People put on these gloves and they think they're invincible, and that's not what the gloves are for. The gloves are to protect the customers, not you. They're not to keep your hands from getting dirty. So that's
right. You're
just
not the TSA.
Yes, exactly. And then lack of hand washing is also an issue. Medical facilities, you can run into cross-contamination issues here. If the gloves aren't changed, a doctor comes into a room, and they don't wash their hands when they come into the room. Sometimes I've on many occasions see doctors come into rooms and just use the hand sanitizer. And the hand sanitizers, you've seen this happen in restaurants, they come in and use the hand sanitizers, and while the hand sanitizer says that it kills 99.99% of bacteria, 0.01%, when you think about how many different kinds of bacteria in the world, is a really big number. You think about, a bazillion different kinds of bacteria, 0.01% of a bazillion is huge. And, it kills bacteria that you don't stand a chance of probably ever coming in contact with. Bacteria in the rainforest of South America and the jungles of Africa. it's going to kill that bacteria, but more than likely you're not ever going to come in contact with it. And in addition to that, it can't distinguish between good bacteria and bad bacteria, and you need that good bacteria in order to stay healthy. So medical facilities can be an issue. Hospitals, for the same reason, you know, if the beds aren't cleaned properly, if hands aren't washed properly, and just coming in general contact. Street vendors, oftentimes there aren't adequate hand washing facilities at these sites. And, you know, many times they're not washing their hands properly. Food prep. It's important that when food prep is being done, keeping in mind that some of the food prep items are going to be used as ready-to-eat food. So they need to be handled properly throughout the process. And if you look at that section behind this lady that's standing there, there's a fair amount of cross-contamination going on back there. I had the honor of doing a presentation in Dubai about a month ago. I was talking to a gentleman from Africa, and he was telling me because of the way that they transport food, which is frequently on their head, they have a problem with listeria. And it has to do with the personal hygiene aspect in transporting food by carrying it on their heads. Found that very interesting.
Yeah, how would that increase the listeria?
We didn't talk about that in depth. My guess is and you know, listeria is usually not something that you think about with your head. It's not something that I would associate with that. I'm gonna guess. I would have to research that a little bit more. It's just something that he shared with me. I kind of had the same question that you did, but he said it's a frequent problem there. I'm going to guess it has to do with where they set the products, the containers, maybe. Like on the ground. When they fill them, where setting them on the ground and then not keeping them clean. That would be my assumption. Yeah. I don't know if that's an accurate answer, but that would be my guess.
If they're transporting it on their head over a distance at all, you kind of disrupted a cold chain.
Well, and that's more your area than mine, so of expertise. But they don't have a lot of potable water situations, and they do transport that food for a long distance. You know, we're not talking a couple blocks. They don't have transportation like we do. Yeah. So in many cases, that food is being transported on their head for a long distance. Yeah. So that could be the case. Again, that's something, if somebody wanted to know that, I'd be happy to do the research for it. Foodborne illnesses that are prevalent to being spread by cross-contamination. Shigella. This is carried in the stool of people who are infected, and this can live in the stool for a significant period of time. Flies spread this. Flies are notorious for spreading Shigella. Flies land on anything. Flies are like cockroaches with wings. They will live on anywhere and carry all kinds of bacteria. This can be your items that are like tuna salad, macaroni salad, items where there's a lot of chopping, slicing, and dicing, and that's because there's an opportunity for a lot of bare hand contact. 1 out of 3 people that use the restroom, statistically speaking, don't wash their hands. So if they're not washing their hands when they use the restroom and there's fecal matter on their hands and they go to the kitchen and they're chopping, slicing, and dicing, their shig ends up in the food, and that's how Shigella gets spread.
Wow, that's really shiggy.
It is shiggy. And there are many instances of outbreaks of Shigella in daycares and nursing homes. And the reason for this is small children are just learning how to use the restroom. They frequently don't wash their hands well. If they're even washing their hands at all, they're putting their hands in their mouth and in everybody else's mouth. They're touching the toys and putting the toys in their mouths. And so the Shigella will spread throughout. And then, unfortunately, as adults, or aged adults, as we, continue to go throughout the process, we sometimes revert back to childhood, and those things just tend to happen again, unfortunately, as we revert. Norovirus, Noroman, as Matt mentioned, is going to come up a little bit later. This is the most common cause of gastrointestinal infections, and it's highly contagious and spreads rapidly. October through March is the season for norovirus, and you're going to start to see a lot of publications as far as norovirus outbreaks here in the next month or so. And it's highly contagious. Vomiting, diarrhea, miserable illness. Hepatitis A is what happens with this is your liver won't function as well, and it's a highly contagious liver infection. Hepatitis A is the only hepatitis that comes from eating food. If it's any other type of hepatitis, it did not come from eating food. Worldwide, norovirus is the #1 cause of foodborne illness and the number 4 cause of foodborne deaths. And as I said earlier, many people don't think of foodborne illnesses as causing death, especially norovirus. And you can see here that it is responsible for not only causing deaths, but being the #4 cause in the world for foodborne illness deaths. And the reason for that would be the dehydration factor in some areas and people with the weakened immune systems. And that is the world famous Noroman. You end up with projectile vomiting and explosive diarrhea. It's not a good situation. Highly contagious. Of the norovirus outbreaks that have been traced back to their original cause, 70% have been caused by infected workers. And it's believed that the reason for this in the food service industry and the retail industry is that, when these people are ill, many times they don't have medical insurance. They can't afford to take off work, so they come to work anyway. And in addition to that, just because of the nature of the business and a lack of understanding, lack of training, when people call in sick and due to staffing situations, many times they're asked to come to work anyway. So again, 70% of these outbreaks have been traced back to ill workers.
Yeah, and that's a great question I want to ask you, because I remember being a server for a long time and then moving to Starbucks, managing a Starbucks. And it wasn't until I got to Starbucks I really learned about food safety. And there was some crazy stuff that people were doing. I mean, this is 20 years ago, but, or longer, actually. Sad. What do you see? What do you see in the training side of restaurants now? Do you see more of an understanding of food safety and more of a institutional-wide trainings for employees, or do you see that that's like a really bad part?
I believe that executive managers of large corporations have a very clear understanding of what needs to happen, and they know what's right and what's wrong. And I believe that there are corporations out there that do a very good job of saying this is what should and should not happen. I believe that when you get down to the reality of the situation in a Friday night in a restaurant, when you're short-staffed and somebody gets sick, there are managers out there that say, can you just come in for a few hours? And that's how these outbreaks occur. There are FDA forms out there, and you're probably aware of these, the forms, for the FDA forms 1A, B, and C that are conditional employment forms. And most of the people that I talk to don't even know they exist. And they really should. Those are forms that should be gone over at orientation with employees as part of their orientation packets, where it goes over the symptoms for the big 6 illnesses, hepatitis A, E. coli, Salmonella typhi, Salmonella non-typhoid, and Shigella. And saying, do you have any of these symptoms? Have you exhibited any of these symptoms? Have you, and if you do, these are the things that, this is what's required. It just amazes me that those policies and procedures aren't in place in many places. The food code clearly recommends that there are norovirus policies and procedures in place for cleaning up of the diarrheal and vomiting events. And I can tell you myself, after doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of inspections, that very rarely do I find those policies and procedures in place. So I believe the intentions are good. I think that companies try to do a very good job. I just think that by the time it gets down to the policies and procedures get down to the hourly employees, the knowledge gets watered down and they don't really know or understand. And that's my honest answer. I wish it was.
Do you see it getting better though, or?
I didn't hear that.
I'm sorry. Do you see it getting better, or is it just maintaining status quo?
Maintaining status quo at this point. I really do. In the states where again, we have large corporations that do a very good job of making sure, and some companies do a very good job of making sure that, I don't want to sound like I'm throwing people under the bus, I'm not, that do a very good job of doing what needs to be done. But many times when we are out there, providing this training and this education, when you have 50 or 60 people in a class, or a lot of times the attitude is we're here because we have to be here. And, I just wrote an article for Food Safety News about this. I had an executive from a national corporation say to me, I don't care what you have to do. I just want my people to pass the test.
Wow.
And, I've always say there's a difference between training and education. People need to be educated. They need to understand the whys, not just do it, but they need to understand why. And I believe that you get better results if you explain why, not just do it, but
Right.
why you do it that way. And it can be done. It can be done. I see it done. It's just, and I come from the industry. I'm not somebody that, you know, just is saying this is how it should be done. You should really do it this way. And, you know, I come from industry. I spent years working in a restaurant. I worked in the food service industry for over 20 years. So I've got that experience. You know, I'm not just, I feel like, you know, a lot of times people that, you know, maybe went to school or whatever, and they're out there preaching and they don't have restaurant experience. You know, I've worked in a restaurant. So I don't know. Sometimes it gets frustrating. I care about what I do. I'm very passionate about what I do. Did that answer your question?
Okay, well, I'll let you keep going. And yes. Yeah. Thank you.
So how do we prevent this? You need to wash your hands and surfaces often. Don't just wash them, but wash, rinse, and sanitize. Harmful bacteria can spread throughout the kitchen and get onto cutting boards, utensils, and countertops. You want to prevent cross-contamination by washing, rinsing, and sanitizing all food contact surfaces. The word sanitize is overused. You only sanitize food contact surfaces. I've seen programs out there, training programs, where they talk about sanitizing floors and walls. You wash, rinse, and sanitize food contact surfaces. Hands, the new food code has eliminated the temperature for washing hands. I know the National Registry is updating, and this is new information. The National Registry is updating their exams as of the beginning of October. ServSafe, we've not received notification that they have done that yet. So they've eliminated the temperature. So wash your hands with water that's as hot as you can comfortably stand that soap water. Scrub them, rinse, and then of course, you know, dry. Paper towel is better than an air dryer. Drying with a paper towel is going to remove 20% more germs and bacteria than an air dryer. Well, and then of course, use the paper towel to open the door. So how do you reduce the risk of cross-contamination? Wash your hands. Wash your hands. Wash your hands. Wash your freaking hands. Hand washing with soap stops the spread of disease and can save more lives than any single vaccine or medical interventions. I find that interesting. And then these are ways to, and this is common sense. I'm not going to read these to you, but this is how you prevent cross-contamination. They're common sense. Don't reuse dirty dishes. Make sure that you wash, rinse, and sanitize. And sanitize is an important step in this, especially for people with food allergens.
So, quick question. Somebody asking, it was during the hand washing part, what regularly means. Is it 4 hours or less? So I wanted you to kind of explain, what does doing that regularly mean?
Where are we talking?
Yeah, probably.
Prevent cross-contamination, wash, rinse, and sanitize all contact surfaces regularly. Regularly would mean a minimum of every 4 hours if they're in constant use, and then it would mean any time that you would walk away from what you're doing if you change products. But any time that there would be any opportunity for contamination or cross-contamination.
Like raw chicken and pork and that type of stuff on.
I mean, those would be the obvious, but yes, that would be the obvious. But then, a minimum of every 4 hours.
Yeah. And then when we were talking about the hand washing side, you talked about sanitizer beforehand, and someone asked, does that, can sanitizer kills all the microbes? And the answer to that is no, right? What you said earlier.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's one of those things you can do really, really well after you wash your hands. You add hand sanitizer, and it helps kill off a lot of the stuff. But as we're talking about cross-contamination, you were talking last week about chlorine doing a really good job on the that sanitizer will kill off everything pretty well.
Right. Hand sanitizer, the illnesses that we're worried about in the food service industry, it really is no good for us in the food service industry. If you want to use it after you've washed your hands, that's fine. When it comes to norovirus, it's useless. Bleach is what will work on norovirus. At the end of, I don't know if it's the end of this PowerPoint or not, but at the end of the PowerPoint presentation I did last week, the NoroCore website is on there, and it gives very specific instructions on how to kill norovirus. And bleach is the answer for killing norovirus. So, yeah, the hand sanitizers, you know, again, they put that 99.9% out there, but it's not what we're looking for in the food service industry. If you're looking common cold, it's great for the common cold. And there are some things out there that it is very effective on, but not what we are looking for in the food service industry.
Right.
So what we really want to do is create a food safety culture. And you can't do that in one day, 1 week, or 1 month. This is ongoing and never ending. And it's repetitive. It's something that it needs to work from the C-suite clear down to the hourly employees. And it's a commitment. And it's a commitment to consistently operating in a safe manner, being proactive, eliminating all the hazards, and in training employees. And, you know, you can't train them one way and say, oh, okay, well, that's how we trained you, but this is how we're really going to do it, or this is how we're going to do it today. It has to be consistent, and you have to stick with those standards even when it's difficult. And I know that sometimes it's difficult. I know what it's like to work short-staffed because 3 people called in sick on a Friday night. But it's important to keep the general public safe. Cross-contact.
Quick question. Have you worked with a company on just that, creating a food safety culture within their restaurant or restaurant chain?
We have.
And how was that? Like what type of things? I mean, that'll be a whole another presentation, I'm sure. Actually,
I was actually asked
to do that.
We were actually asked to go. I didn't have time, and I wish I could have. I was actually asked to go to Chile to do that for an organization next month, and I didn't have time to go down and do it in Latin America. But I thought that was pretty cool.
So you don't have to go into like really big details, but how long would you say it would take? I'm guessing one restaurant would be fairly easy, but like a chain, how would you create a food safety culture within a chain?
It would depend on what they have to work
currently
work with. You know what I mean? What is currently in existence, and you know, you would what they already, how good of a program they already have.
Yeah. All right. Well, I won't go. It's literally, that could be its own webinar, and I'm going to ask you back for just that: how to create a food safety culture within your restaurant or restaurant chain. I already have the title.
Okay.
I think that's such a big thing, and when I saw that, because everything you've been talking about the last 2 weeks is really you have to create the culture, and one of the people here said consistency, and that's totally true.
Yes.
The culture equals consistency, but you have to have everything in place to make that consistency work. Like at Starbucks, it was the second I got there, it was they trained us as managers about food safety, and then how we were supposed to correct and train the employees, and it was so ingrained. But if it isn't ingrained in your culture, you have to go through and create the consistency first, and that's got to be very difficult.
And you need the buy-in. You need that buy-in from everybody. You know what I mean? You have to have the buy-in, and it's not easy to get that, especially if it's not already there.
Right.
You know what I mean? You can't just talk the talk, you've got to walk the walk. So it's, and if it's kind of like, if you're saying to your employees, okay, well, these are the things you have to do, but the CEO walks in the door and he's not doing those things.
Right.
Why are the employees going to do it?
Have the same conversation with people on the supply chain side of stuff too. You have all these food safety manuals, and you have your SOPs, and you have your logs. Everything looks beautiful, but if you walk in smoking a cigarette or chewing tobacco, or drinking a Coke while you're walking the floor, you're not helping the situation.
Well, and it's, I was talking about, where was I? Maybe we talked about this last week, and then I saw something that just immediately reminded me of it. Whenever we got promoted, we couldn't wait because we didn't have to wear our hats, and it was like, so what, you got promoted and your hair didn't fall out anymore?
Right.
So, if you are the, district manager and you have long hair and you go in the kitchen, should you be wearing a hat? Should you put on gloves? Should you wash your hands as soon as you go in the kitchen? Right. Should a health inspector wash their hands as soon as they go in the kitchen? When I did. Because if I'm not setting that standard, why should the people that are working there?
Right.
Because they're going to say, well, Francine just did our health inspection and she didn't when she came in.
Right. Yeah.
And those are the standards, and they're going to emulate your behavior.
Yeah.
And
that's, I had an owner one time bring me and ask me to help them figure out what they needed to do to get a food safety audit certificate. And we go and we walk into his facility, and he's chewing, and I'm wondering what he's going to do with this. And he spits on the ground in his own facility. And he asked me, like, right after he spits, so where do we start? And I said, with new ownership. I'm like, I don't know. It didn't end very well, but
when I was a store manager, right before I got promoted, one of my responsibilities was I would go in and clean stores up, meaning sometimes I would have to and fire 3/4 of staff, hire new people, and just clean, raise the standards of that.
It's why you're so good at what you do. I tell you all the time, the best food safety people are the ones that help hide skeletons in closets, because they know where to look, right? I mean,
Well, exactly. I worked in the restaurant, so I know what stores used to do when the health inspector walked in the door. I've been the health inspector, so I know what we look for. And, now we do consulting and training, so I know what to tell them besides, Yeah. So it's kind of the whole package.
Yeah, it's totally great. Okay, well, I'll let you keep going on.
So cross-contact, again, is totally different than cross-contamination. This occurs when an allergen has inadvertently transferred from a food containing an allergen to a food that does not contain that allergen, or a product not containing that allergen. This is serious, and a lot of times, especially for people that are non-allergic, they don't understand the seriousness of this. Somebody that has a food allergy, it can go into anaphylaxis and be dead within 15 minutes. That means they can be dead before the paramedics get there. A little too far there. Epidemiology, food allergy affects approximately 2.5% of the general population in the world. That's not in the United States, but in the world. It's really hard to get a good read on what this actual number is, just because of the accurate determination and prevalence with major problems in food allergies, considering different factors that influence the reports and the prevalence in different areas around the world. Food allergies vary from one country to another, and I find this to be very interesting. For example, in China, peanuts isn't a real prevalent food allergy, but in the United States, we know that peanuts are a very prevalent allergy. They think that it might have to do with the way that the peanuts are commonly prepared. For example, we tend to roast peanuts in the United States, but in China, they're more likely to be boiled. So they feel that maybe that has something to do with the difference. And you can see the countries that I have listed on this slide, there are things like kiwi and sesame and rice. And I know people that are allergic to strawberries. I have a friend that's one of the girls that work for me, her mother's allergic to kiwi. So I read a slide yesterday that one of the countries require that tomatoes are listed because they have a high instance of tomato allergies in the country. All food service organizations are different. Chipotle is different than McDonald's. McDonald's is different than Ruth Chris Steakhouse. They're all different, but they all have the same common goal, and that is to keep their guests safe. Nobody intentionally makes their guests sick. So we've already talked about this. You know, how do you create a food safety culture? The one thing about food safety is that, you know, it's a lot of the food safety programs that we see are, they're not very fun, they're monotonous, they're boring, and nobody really wants to do it or deal with it. It doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be something that your employees dread being a part of. I believe that you can make food safety training fun. And I think that I know that people learn more when they're having fun. And if corporations would make an effort to make their food safety training programs fun, people would be more willing to be a part of those programs. They would learn more from them. We already talked about leading by example. Explain the whys. Explain why poultry has to go in the bottom and can't go above the lettuce. When I was an employee, I was your average employee. And I can tell you that for years, I didn't know that the lettuce couldn't go under the poultry, and I didn't know why. And I can guarantee you that there were times that I put the raw produce under the poultry without realizing that if that poultry blood dripped down on the lettuce, I could kill somebody. I had no idea. It was years until I understood why that was a problem. And now I'm praying nobody got sick. Follow up. And this is key no matter what you're doing. I don't care if you're following up with your management staff on their temperature logs or the receiving logs or the HACCP plan that they wrote that's sitting on a shelf that's collecting dust and hasn't been updated since, 1999. You have to follow up. If you're not going to follow up, nobody is going to think whatever task they've been assigned is important. And following up doesn't mean that you have to sit down and have a 3-hour conversation. Maybe you just walk past them and casually ask a question, or maybe you do sit down and have a discussion. Follow up can mean a variety of things, but it's important that you do follow up with whatever it is that you're doing. Again, whether it is a shift check or a knowledge check or whatever task it is that they've been assigned or whatever procedure it is that they have recently learned. And job aids, post job aids. And job aids, a lot of times, I saw a job aid yesterday that was like an 8x11 sheet of paper that was written in not very big font that was full of writing. And I don't know who they thought was reading that, but I'll guarantee you nobody is. Use pictures. Pictures are fun. And those job aids are going to get a lot more results than an 8x11.5 sheet of paper that's full of print. Ongoing training programs for your teams at all levels. Many times we hire people entry level to upper management, and we put them through a training program when they're hired, and that's it. They're there for 10 years and they never receive any additional training. Training's important, and it should be an ongoing part of their continuing ed programs, whether you do that quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. Things change. The food code changes. It updates every 4 years, and there are typically some type of update every 2 years that will be sent out. Things within your organization change on a regular basis. So provide some kind of ongoing training for your staff. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And on the training side thing and the job aids thing, there are some great videos on YouTube, and I'll actually post them down below, where Frank Yenis talks about this from Walmart, and he has a lot of great resources on that. Actually, he's written a couple books about food safety culture that are really good. But he even created a wrap within Walmart, like a food safety wrap. Got a bunch of kids together in a training, and they created a wrap, and then created like a video on it to share with the trainings and stuff. So there's a lot of really fun ways, going back to your training side, where you can keep people engaged, etc.
There's a CD, I can't remember who it is, but it's a whole CD of food safety songs that are done to, they were pop songs in like the 80s that we used to play at, and sometimes still do play at the beginning of our food safety classes. So that kind of stuff's out there, and as corny as it sounds, people think it's fun.
I think they think it's fun because it is corny.
Yes, and it sticks with them. You know,
right.
It sticks with them.
Right. We had another question just now that came up. They said, how should a food handler react when sneezing to avoid cross-contamination in hotel kitchens or kitchens in general?
If they can't get out of the kitchen.
How do you train people to sneeze when they're in kitchens?
I just sneeze
That's
into
exactly
their
what
arm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say. That's how I train all my children too, is do that. Yeah. And then there was another question that can quat kill norovirus?
Sanitizing itself, you have to wash the dish. The sanitizing isn't what's killing the cleaning. It's a 3-step process. You wash, you rinse, you sanitize.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Well, I think that's it for our questions, unless another one pops up. The sneezing in your arm thing. She asked a secondary question. Wouldn't that contaminate your clothes?
That answer is yes, absolutely. It is gonna contaminate your clothing.
Yeah.
Yes. An open sneeze is gonna contaminate everything in the room. I mean, so I mean, if you can't get out of the area, clearly you have to do something, you know. An open sneeze is gonna just be viral. It's gonna contaminate everything. You know, if you sneeze into your hand, and you can immediately go wash them.
Yeah. That's exactly what she wrote. She sneezes in both of her hands so she can wash them. So there you go. Just make sure you wash your hands.
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands. Wash your hands. Wash your hands.
The one thing I should probably say is, everything is circumstantial. It depends on your environment, what you're doing, and where you are. So, or situational, I should say. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What type of environment you're working in and where you are. So there's not really a blanket answer for everything.
Except for wash your hands.
Well, always wash your hands. What did I say? Wash your freaking hands.
You have to. You're missing a slide in here that is in your office. That big.
That's behind our hand washing sink. Yeah, in the training room.
Slide in here.
I can't hear you. You're gone. You're gone, Matt.